Its face was skillfully painted and powdered. A mauve blanket, exquisitely smooth, came up to its chin. What looked like a fluffy, piebald toy dog was prettily placed at the foot of the bed. Before rushing out of the ward, Krug knocked this thing off the blanket, whereupon the creature, coming to life, gave a snarl of pain. Its jaw snapped, narrowly missing his hand. Krug was caught by a friendly soldier. Yabloko kudaji tak kotisha. Little apple, whither are you rolling? Asked the soldier, and added, Apoljabaram malai kushish. Want me to hit you, friend? Tut poshuk zhishni stanovista krini. Neraz borshivin. Here the long hand of life becomes extremely illegible. Ochivitsi shredi kotoryik bil evo yuristrini sogledatai. Witnesses, among whom was his own something or other, enters by private detective. The sense is not at all clear. Potom Govorli afterwards said, Shto evi prishos shivzat, that he had to be tied Meshjutim among the themes, perhaps among the subjects of his dreamlike state. Crystal sin Nevoshimutimo Dimad Sigaroi. Crystalson, calmly smoking a cigar, Sabralves Shtat the Acto Vom Zal, called a meeting of the whole staff in the assembly hall and informed them that he had just received a telephone message according to which they would all be court-martialed for doing death the only son of Professor Krug, celebrated philosopher, president of the university, vice president of the Academy of Medicine. Weak-hearted, Hamek slid from his chair and went on sliding, tobogganing down sinuous slopes, and after a smooth swoon run, finally came to rest like a derelict sleigh on the virgin's nose of anonymous death. The women Frechtel, without losing her poise, swallowed a pill of poison. After trying and burying the rest of the staff and setting fire to the building where the buzzing patients were locked up, the soldiers carried Krug to the car. They drove back to the capital across the wild mountains. Beyond Lagadon Pass, the valleys were already brimming with dusk. Night took over among the great fir trees near the famous falls. Olga was at the wheel. Krug, a non-driver, sat beside her, his gloved hands folded in his lap. Behind sat Ember and an American professor of philosophy, a gaunt, hollow-cheeked, white-haired man who had come all the way from his remote country to discuss with Krug the illusion of substance. Gorged with landscapes and rich local food, wrongly accented poroshki, wrongly spelled shitchi, and an unpronounceable meat course followed by a hot crisscross-crusted cherry pie. The gentle scholar had fallen asleep. Ember was trying to recall the American name for a similar kind of fir tree in the Rocky Mountains. Two things happened together. Ember said Douglas, and a dazzled Joe plunged into the blaze of our lights. Chapter 18. This ought never to have happened. We are terribly sorry. Your child will be given the most scrumptious burial a white man's child could dream up, but still we quite understand that for those who remain this is, two words, indistinct. We are more than sorry. Indeed, it can be safely asserted that never in the history of this great country has a group, a government, or a ruler been as sorry as we are today. Krug had been brought to a spacious room resplendent with megapod murals in which in the Ministry of Justice. A picture of the building itself as it had been planned, but not actually built yet, in consequence of fires, justice, and education, shared the Hotel Astoria, showed a white skyscraper mounting like an albino cathedral into a morpho-blue sky. The voice belonging to one of the elders, who were holding an extraordinary session in the palace 2 blocks away, poured forth from a handsome walnut cabinet. Crystalson and several clerks were whispering together in another part of the hall. We feel, however, continued the walnut voice, that nothing has changed in the relationship, the bond, the agreement, which you, Adam Krug, so solemnly defined just before the personal tragedy occurred. Individual lives are insecure, but we guarantee the immortality of the state. Citizens die so that the city may live. We cannot believe that any personal bereavement can come between you and our ruler. On the other hand, there is practically no limit to the amends we are ready to make. In the first place, our foremost funeral home has agreed to deliver a bronze casket with garnet and turquoise incrustations. There in your little Arvid will lie, clasping his favorite toy, a box of tin soldiers, which at this very moment several experts at the Ministry of War are minutely checking in regard to the correctness of uniforms and weapons. In the second place, the 6 main culprits will be executed by an inexperienced headsman in your presence. This is a sensational offer. Krug had been shown these persons in their death cells a few minutes before. The 2 dark, pimply youths, attended by a Catholic priest, were putting on a brave show, due mainly to lack of imagination. Mariette sat with closed eyes in a rigid faint, bleeding gently. Of the other 3, the less said the better. You will certainly appreciate, said the walnut and fudge voice, the effort we make to atone for the worst blunder that could have been committed under the circumstances. We are ready to condone many things, including murder, but there is one crime that can never be forgiven, and that is carelessness in the performance of one's official duty. We also feel that having made the handsome amends just stated, we are through with the whole miserable business and do not have to refer to it any more. You will be pleased to hear that we are ready to discuss with you the various details of your new appointment. Christelsen came over to where Krug sat, still in his dressing gown, his bristly cheek propped on his embraced knuckles, and spread out several documents on the lion-clawed table whose edge supported Krug's elbow. With his red and blue pencil, the blue-eyed, red-faced official made little crosses here and there on the papers, showing Krug where to sign. In silence, Krug took the papers and slowly crushed and tore them with his big, hairy hands. One of the clerks, a thin, nervous young man who knew how much thought and labor the printing of documents on precious Edelweiss paper had demanded, clutched at his brow and uttered a shriek of pure pain. Krug, without leaving his seat, caught the young man by his coat and with the same ponderous, crushing, slow gestures began to strangle his victim, but was made to desist. Christelsen, who alone had retained a most perfect calm, notified the microphone of the following terms. The sounds you have just heard, gentlemen, are the sounds made by Adam Krug in tearing the papers he had promised to sign last night. He has also attempted to choke one of my assistants. Silence ensued. Christelsen sat down and began cleaning his nails with a steel shoe blunter, contained, together with 23 other instruments, and a fat pocket knife which he had filched somewhere during the day. The clerks on their hands and knees were collecting and smoothing out what remained of the documents. Apparently there took place a consultation among the elders. Then the voice said, "We are ready to go even further. We offer to let you, Adam Krug, slaughter the culprits yourself. There is a very special offer and not likely to be renewed." "Well?" asked Christelsen without looking up. "Go and 3 words indistinct," said Krug. There was another pause. "The man is crazy, utterly crazy," whispered the effeminate clerk to another. "To turn down such an offer, incredible. Never heard of such a thing." "Me neither. Wonder where the boss got that knife." The elders reached a certain decision, but before making it known, the more conscientious among them thought they would like to have the disc run again. They heard Krug's silence as he surveyed the prisoners. They heard one of the youth's wristwatch, and a sad little gurgle inside the supperless priest. They heard the drop of blood fall upon the floor. They heard 40 satisfied soldiers in the neighboring guardhouse compare carnal notes. They heard Krug being led to this radio room. They heard the voice of one of them saying how sorry they all were, and how ready to make amends. A beautiful tomb for the victim of the carelessness, a terrible doom for the careless. They heard Christelsen sorting out papers and Krug tearing them. They heard the cry of the impressionable young clerk, the sounds of the struggle, with Christelsen's crisp tones. They heard Christelsen's firm fingernails getting at 1/24 of the tight penknife. They heard themselves voicing their generous offer, and Krug's vulgar reply. They heard Christelsen closing the knife with a click, and the clerks whispering. They heard themselves hearing all this. The walnut cabinet moistened its lips. "Let him be led to his bed," it said. No sooner than done. He was given a roomy cell in prison, so roomy and pleasant, in fact, that the director had used it more than once to lodge some poor relatives of his wife when they came to town. On a second straw mattress right on the floor, a man lay with his face to the wall, every inch of his body shivering. A huge curly brown wig sprawled all over his head. His clothes were those of an old-fashioned vagabond. His must have been a dark crime indeed. As soon as the door was closed, and Krug was heavily sunk onto his own patch of straw and sackcloth, the tremor of his fellow prisoner ceased to be visible, but at once became audible as a reedy, quakeably disguised voice. "Do not seek to find who I am. My face will be turned to the wall. To the wall my face will be turned. Turned to the wall forever and ever. My face will be, Madame, you proud all black is your soul as the damp macadam at night. Woe, woe, question thy crime. 'Twill show the depth of my guilt. Dark are the clouds, denser they grow. The hunter comes, riding his terrible steed. Hoyo toho, hoyo toho. Shall I tell him to stop? Thought Krug. What's the use? H is full of these murmurs. Hoyo toho, now listen, friend. Listen, Gerda. We are going to make you a last offer. 4 friends you had, 4 staunch friends and true. Deep in a dungeon they languish and moan. Listen, Drug, listen, camarade. I am ready to give them, and some 20 other liberal shliki, their freedom, if you agree that you had practically agreed to yesterday, such a small thing. The lives of 24 men are in your hands. If you say no, they will be destroyed. If it is I, they live. Think what marvelous power. You sign your name, and 22 men and 2 women flock out into the sunlight. It is your last chance. Madamka, say yes. Go to H, you filthy toad, said Krug wearily. The man uttered a cry of rage, and snatching a bronze cowbell from under his mattress, shook it furiously. Masked guards with Japanese lanterns and lances invaded the cell and reverently helped him to his feet, covering his face with the hideous locks of his red-brown wig. He passed by Krug's elbow. His jackboot smelled of dung and glistened with innumerable teardrops. The darkness swept back into place. One could hear the prison governor's creaking spine and his voice telling the toad what a dandy actor he was, what a swell performance, what a treat. The echoing steps retreated. Silence now at last, you may think. But swoon or slumber, he lost consciousness before he could properly grapple with his grief. All he felt was a slow sinking, a concentration of darkness and tenderness, a gradual growth of sweet warmth. His head and Olga's head, cheek to cheek, 2 heads held together by a pair of small experimenting hands, which stretched up from a dim bed where as was for 2 heads formed one, going down, downwards, down towards a third point, towards a silently laughing face. There was a soft chuckle just as his and her lips reached the child's cool brow and hot cheek, but the descent did not stop there, and Krug continued to sink into the heart-rending softness, into the black dazzling depths of a belated but never mind eternal caress. In the middle of the night, something in dreams shook him out of his sleep into what was really a prison cell with bars of light, and a separate pale gleam like the footprint of some phosphorescent islander breaking the darkness. At first, as sometimes happens, his surroundings did not match any from reality. Although of humble origin, a vigilant arc light outside a livid corner of the prison yard, an oblique ray coming through some chink or bullet hole in the bolted and padlocked shutters, the luminous pattern he saw assumed a strange, perhaps fatal significance, the key to which was half hidden by a flap of dark consciousness and the glimmering floor of half a remembered nightmare. It would seem that some promise had been broken, some design thwarted, some opportunity missed or so grossly exploited as to leave an afterglow of sin and shame. The pattern of light was somehow the result of a kind of stealthy, abstractly vindictive, groping, champering movement that had been growing on in a dream, or behind a dream, in a tangle of immemorial, and by now formless and aimless machinations. Imagine a sign that warns you of an explosion in such cryptic and childish language that you wonder whether everything, the sign, the frozen explosion under the windowsill, and your quivering soul had not been reproduced artificially, there and then, by special arrangement with the mind behind the mirror. It was at that moment, just after Krug had fallen through the bottom of a confused dream and sat up on the straw with a gasp just before this reality, he remembered hideous misfortune, could pounce upon him. It was then that he felt a pang of pity for Adam and slid towards him along an inclined beam of pale light, causing instantaneous madness, but at least saving him from the senseless agony of his logical fate. With a smile of infinite relief on his tear-stained face, Krug lay back on the straw. In the limpid darkness he lay amazed and happy, and listened to the usual nocturnal sounds peculiar to great prisons, the occasional ak-ka-ka-aka yawn of the guard, the laborious mumble of sleepless elderly prisoners studying their English grammar books. My aunt has a visa. Uncle Saul wants to see Uncle Samuel. The child is bold. The heartbeats of younger men noiselessly digging underground passage to freedom and recapture. The pattering sound made by excrementa of bats, the cautious crackling of a page which had been viciously crumpled and thrown into the wastebasket and was making a pitiful effort to uncrumple itself and live just a little longer. When at dawn 4 elegant officers, 3 counts, and a Georgian prince came to take him a crucial meeting with friends. He refused to move and lay smiling at them and playfully trying to chuck them under their chins by means of his bare toes. He could not be made to put on any clothes, and after a hurried consultation with the 4 young guardsmen, swearing in old-fashioned French, carried him as he was, i.e. dressed only in white pajamas, to the very same car that had once been smoothly driven by the late Dr. Alexander. He was given a program of the confrontation ceremony and led through a kind of tunnel into a central yard. As he contemplated the shape of the yard, the jutting roof and yonder porch, the gaping arch of the tunnel-like entrance through which he had come, it dawned upon him with a kind of frivolous precision difficult to express that this was the yard of his school. But the building itself had been altered. Its windows had grown in length, and through them one could see a flock of hired waiters from the Astoria laying a table from a fairy tale feast. He stood in his white pajamas, bareheaded, barefooted, blinking, looking this way and that. He saw a number of unexpected people near the dingy wall separating the yard from the workshop of a surly old neighbor who never threw back one's ball. There stood a stiff and silent group of guards and bemedaled officials. Among them stood Paduch, one heel scraping the wall, his arms folded, and in another dimmer part of the yard several shabbily clothed men and 2 women represented the hostages, as the program given to Krug said. His sister-in-law sat in the swing, her feet trying to catch the ground, and her blond-bearded husband was in the act of plucking at one of the ropes when she snarled at him for causing the swing to wobble, and slithered off with an ungrateful movement and waved to Krug. Somewhat apart stood Hedron and Ember and Rufel, and a man he could not quite place, and Maximov and Maximov's wife. Everybody wanted to talk to the smiling professor, for it was not known that his son had died, and that he himself was insane. But the soldiers had their orders and allowed the petitioners to approach only in pairs. One of the elders, a person called Shem, bent his plumed head toward Paduch, and half pointing in a nervously diffident finger, taking back as it were every jerky poke he made with it, and using some other finger to repeat the gesture, explained the goings-on in a low voice. Paduch nodded and stared at nothing and nodded again. Professor Ruffel, a high-strung, angular, extremely hirsute little man with hollow cheeks and yellow tooth, came up to Krug together with, "Goodness, Schimpfer!" exclaimed Krug. "Fancy meeting you here after all these years. Let me see." "A quarter of a century," said Schimpfer in a deep voice. "Well, well, this certainly is like old times," Krug went on with a laugh. "And what with the toad there," a gust of wind overturned an empty, sonorous ash can. A small vortex of dust raced across the yard. "I have been elected as spokesman," said Ruffel. "You know the situation. I shall not dwell upon details because time is short. We want you to know that we do not wish your plight to influence you in any way. We want you to live very much indeed, but we shall not bear you any grudge whatsoever." He cleared his throat. Ember, still far away, was bobbing and straining like Punch, trying to get a glimpse of Krug over the shoulders and heads. "No grudge, not at all," Ruffel continued rapidly. "In fact, we shall quite understand if you decline to yield. Vi pominete o czym rzecz dać, że my znak, što vi pominete. Do you understand what it is all about? Make me a sign that you understand." "It is all right, go on," said Krug. "It was just trying to remember. You were arrested, let me see, just before the cat left the room, I suppose." Krug waved to Ember, whose big nose and red ears kept appearing here and there between soldiers and shoulders. "Yes, I think I remember now. We have asked Professor Ruhl to be our spokesman," said Schimpfer. "Yes, I see, a wonderful orator. I have heard you, Ruffel, in your prime, on a lofty platform among flowers and flags. Why is it that bright colors, my friend?" said Ruffel. "Time is short, please. Let me continue. We are no heroes. Death is hideous. There are 2 women among us sharing our fate. Our miserable flesh would throb with exquisite joy if you considered to save our lives by selling your soul. We do not ask you to sell your soul. We merely—" Krug, interrupting him with a gesture, made a dreadful grimace. The crowd waited in breathless suspense. Krug rent the silence with a tremendous sneeze. "You silly people," he said, wiping his nose with his hand. "What on earth are you afraid of? What does it all matter? Ridiculous. Same as those infantile pleasures. Olga and the boy taking part in some silly theatricals, she getting drowned, he losing his wife, or something in a railway accident. What on earth does it matter?" "Well, if it does not matter," said Ruffel, breathing hard, "then darn it, tell them you are ready to do your best, and stick to it, and we shall not be shot. You see, it is a horrible situation," said Schimpfer, who had been a brave, banal, red-haired boy, but now had a pale, puffy face with freckles showing through the sparse hair. "We have been told that unless you accepted the government's terms, this is our last day. I have a big factory of sport articles in Aslogada. I was arrested in the middle of the night and clapped into prison. I am law-abiding citizen and do not understand in the least why anybody should turn down a governmental offer. But I know that you are an exceptional person and may have exceptional reasons, and believe me, I should hate to make you do anything dishonorable or foolish. Krug, do you hear what you are saying? Asked Rufel abruptly, and Krug continued to look at him with a benevolent and somewhat loose-lipped smile, and they realized with a shock that they were addressing a madman. Groshinko pollution eats. It's a petty business. Pretty business, remarked Rufel to dumbfounded Schimpfer. A colored photograph taken a moment or two later showed the following. On the right, facing the exit near the gray wall, Paduk was seated with his thighs parted in a chair which had just been fetched for him from the house. He wore the green and brown mottled uniform of one of his favorite regiments. His face was a dead pink blob under a waterproof cap, which his father had once invented. He sported bottle-shaped brown leggings. Sham, a gorgeous person in a brass breastplate and wide-rimmed white-feathered hat of black velvet, was leaning toward him, saying something to the sulky little dictator. 3 other elders stood nearby, wrapped in black cloaks, like cypresses or conspirators. Several handsome young men in Cavalleria Rusticana uniforms, armed with brown and green mottled automatic pistols, formed a protective semicircle around the scoop. On the wall behind Paduk and just above his head, an inscription in chalk, an obscene word scrawled by some schoolboy, had been allowed to remain. This gross negligence quite spoiled the right-hand part of the picture. On the left, in the middle of the yard, hatless, this coarse, dark, graying locks, moving in the wind, clothed in ample white pajamas with a silken girdle, and barefooted like a saint of old, loomed Krug. Guards were pointing rifles at Rufel and Schimpfer, who were remonstrating with them. Olga's sister, her face twitching, her eyes trying to look unconcerned, was telling her inefficient husband to go a few steps forward and occupy a more favorable position so that he and she might get to Krug next. In the background, a nurse was giving Maximov an injection. The old man had collapsed, and his kneeling wife was wrapping his feet in her black shawl. They both had been cruelly treated in prison. Hedron, or rather an extremely gifted impersonator, for Hedron himself had committed suicide a few days before, was smoking a Dunhill pipe. Ember shivering, the outline was blurred. Despite the astrakhan coat he wore, had taken advantage of the altercation between the first pair of the guards, and was almost at Krug's elbow. You can move again. Rufel gesticulated. Ember caught Krug by the arm, and Krug turned quickly to his friend. Wait a minute, said Krug. Don't start complaining until I settle this misunderstanding, because you see, this confrontation is a complete misunderstanding. I had a dream last night. Yes, a dream. Oh, never mind. Call it a dream or call it a haloed hallucination, one of those oblique beams across a hermit's cell. Look at my bare feet. Cold as marble, of course. But where was I? Listen, you are not as stupid as the others, are you? You know as well as I do that there is nothing to fear. My dear Adam, said Ember, let us not go into such details as fear. I am ready to die, but there is one thing that I refuse to endure any longer. C'est la tragédie des cabinets. It is killing me, as you know. I have a most queasy stomach, and they lead me into an seamed draught, an inferno of filth once a day for a minute. C'est atroce. I prefer to be shot straight away. As Ruel and Schimpfer still kept struggling and telling the guards that they had not finished talking to Krug, one of the soldiers appealed to the elders, and Shem walked over and softly spoke. This will never do, he said in careful accents. By sheer willpower he had cured himself an explosive stammer in his youth. The program must be carried out with all its chattering confusion. Let us have done with it. Tell them, he returned to Krug, that you have been elected Minister of Education and Justice, and in this capacity are giving them back their lives. Your breastplate is fantastically beautiful, murmured Krug, and with a rapid movement of all 10 fingers drummed upon the convex metal. The days when we played in this very yard are gone, said Sham severely. Krug reached for Sham's headgear and deftly transferred it to his own locks. It was a sissy sealskin bonnet. The boy, with a stutter of rage, tried to retrieve it. Adam Krug threw it to Pinky Schimpfer, who in turn threw it up to a snow-fringed amassment of stacked birch logs where it stuck. Sham ran back into the schoolhouse to complain. The toad, homeward bound, stealthily walked the low wall towards the exit. Adam Krug slung his book satchel across his shoulder, remarked to Schimpfer that it was funny. Did Schimpfer also get sometimes that feeling of a repeated sequence, as if all this had already happened before? Fur cap, I threw it to you. You threw it up. Logs, snow on logs. Cap got stuck. The toad came out. Being of a practical turn of mind, Schimpfer suggested that they had better give the toad a good fright. The 2 boys watched him from behind the logs. The toad stopped near the wall, apparently waiting for a munch. With a tremendous huzzah, Krug led the attack. "For God's sake, stop him," said Rufel. "He has gone bad. We are not responsible for his actions. Stop him." In a burst of vigorous speed, Krug was running toward the wall, where Paduk, his features dissolving in the water of fear, had slid from his chair and was trying to vanish. The yard seethed with wild commotion. Krug dodged the embrace of a guard. Then he left side of his head seemed to burst into flames. The first bullet took off part of his ear, but he stumbled on cheerfully. "Come on, Shrimp. Come on," he roared without looking back. "Let us trim him. Let us get at his guts. Come on." He saw the toad crouching at the foot of the wall, shaking, dissolving, speeding up his shrill incantations, protecting his dimming face with his transparent arm, and Krug ran towards him, and just a fraction of an instant before another and better bullet hit him, he shouted again, You, the wall vanished like a rapidly withdrawn slide, and I stretched myself and got up from among the chaos of written and rewritten pages to investigate the sudden twang that something had made and striking wire netting of my window. As I had thought, a big moth was clinking with furry feet to the netting, and on the night side its marbled wings kept vibrating. Its eyes glowed like two miniature coals. I had just time to make out its streamlined brownish-pink body and a twinned spot of color, and then let it go and swung back into the warm, damp darkness. Well, that is all. The various parts of my comparative paradise, the bedside lamp, the sleeping tablets, the glass of milk, looked with perfect submission into my eyes. I knew that the immortality that I conferred on the poor fellow was slippery sophism, a play upon words, but the very last lap of his life had been happy, and it had been proved to him that death was but a question of style, some tower clock which I could never exactly locate, which in fact I never heard in the daytime, struck twice, then hesitated and was left behind by the smooth, fast silence that continued to stream through the veins of my aching temples, a question of rhythm. Across the lane, 2 windows only are still alive. In one, the shadow of an arm was combing invisible hair, or perhaps it was a movement of branches. The other was crossed by the slanting black trunk of a poplar. The shaded ray of a street lamp brought out the bright green section of a wet box hedge. I could also distinguish the glint of a special puddle, the one Krug had somehow perceived through the layer of his own life, an oblong puddle invariably acquiring the same form after every shower because of the constant spatulate shape of a depression in the ground. Possibly something of the kind may be said to occur in regard to the imprint we leave in the intimate texture of space. Twang. A good night for mothing. Thank you for listening to me read Sinister by Vladimir Nabokov. I feel still that the end of the book, it is merciful that he does go insane. Although at the very end, it also seems like the only thing which could be done, like to overthrow things, is remember that this is all just being organized really just by one man, and it's really not even a fight of this one guy against an entire system, but it's really the fight between those two is what it really comes down to, and it becomes so it becomes like a parody of everything he went through in his life already, that like all of the tortures he went through and all the tortures that the Duke went through as well, that the thing mentioned towards the beginning of him being abused when he was 8 years old, and then his son being abused when he's only 8 years old as well, and Just little things like that, anyway.